Hello, everyone. My name is Jackson Neff,
And my name is Caden Peterman.
and today we will be speaking to you about the building regulations set in New Jersey to combat climate change. This was based off a New York Times article put out around 5 or 6 months ago, releasing new regulations that New Jersey will set in place to hopefully reduce emissions and combat the climate change. A little background information on New Jersey. A Rutgers University found a rise in global coastal waters. Globally, over the past 100 years, it has risen 0.6 feet, while New Jersey's coastline has risen 1.5 feet in the past 100 years and is expected to rise by yet another foot in 2030. Also, buildings represent 15.4% of carbon emissions. As you can see to the chart to the right, it is only a projected rise in residential properties at risk due to the rising tides. A little bit of background on the effort New Jersey has made. New Jersey wanted to make a conscious effort to not only help the environment, but eventually be producing 100% clean energy by 2050. Over the past 4 years, there has been an effort to roll back on environmental regulations, however. One instance is when the federal government reduced mileage requirements on automakers, and another is when the federal government revoked California's ability to see state-level standards on climate warming tailpipe emissions that were stricter than the federal government's. In simpler terms, the federal government revoked California's ability to reduce tailpipe emissions and to control climate, and the federal government said no, making it a national standard. New Jersey's response. Last January, New Jersey Governor Philip D. Murphy released a policy requiring that builders take into account the impact of climate change, including rising sea levels, in order to win government approval on projects. This initiative is believed to be the most specific attempt to leverage land rules to control where people build, to limit the volume of emissions that are put into the air. Applicants will now be required to have Department of Environmental Protection permits and approvals to factor in how climate change is expected to impact the project and emissions of greenhouse gases. This will also apply to all state-funded projects. If you are building in New Jersey, you must now apply for these permits and go through the proper approval process, no matter the building. So what this means, when builders are looking to start a project, they must report to the Department of Environmental Protection and obtain a permit to make sure they aren't producing too many harmful emissions in the building process. The department will have oversight on the location of the project and the building process itself from start to finish. They will completely monitor the whole project. Some pushback that we have seen. Republicans in the state believe that this will ultimately stop business development. High growth is needed to compete with states such as New York and Delaware and other surrounding states, including California, which is on the opposite coast, that are in a huge effort to expand and build. Building costs will also rise as a result due to compliance with environmentally friendly practices. Completion time will increase as the process takes longer to obtain permits and building the project to specific standards. As you can see, based on the chart here, the increased costs because of compliance will increase supply. It will result in a higher equilibrium price and a lower equilibrium quantity. So from the graph, you can see the regulation effect on the cost of construction. You can tell from the arrows that the new climate conscious building codes are pushing the line, resulting in a deadweight loss with, as we said, higher equilibrium price and a lower equilibrium quantity.
Thank you, Jackson. Now, the article only talked about the pushback, but it didn't talk about the benefactors to this new policy. It's not all a cost. There are some benefits. One of the benefactors would be the insurance industry, because the insurance industry has to manage the risk of buildings, and if these buildings are subject to damages during storms or things such as rising sea level, which we are concerned about here. So by having these climate conscious building regulations in place, the new buildings should have less damage occur to them. This means that the insurance industry will have less risky assets that it has to manage. Currently, there is a negative externality from the pollution that's being created by the buildings and society in general, which is causing rising seas and more extreme weather, which is what is putting these buildings at risk. And part of the negative externality is more property damage in the marginal damages from flooding. So the new regulations should reduce pollution and therefore inherently, in turn, reducing the risk. And by reducing risk, you reduce damages. So marginal damages will decrease, pushing the supply lower, the supply curve that is. This in turn means that we have a reduced social marginal cost. It also means that we have decreased market prices for the insurance, since insurance industries no longer have to allocate additional resources for paying out of destroyed homes. They should have less to do that, so premiums should be lower for people seeking insurance. And this also means increased quality of insurance, because since those less risky assets are removed, you're able to take on better assets that should hopefully not produce such damages and risks. And then part of the economic impact. So this is a performance standard that is currently being debated by and looking to be implemented by the government of New Jersey, since it is looking to regulate how much pollution each project creates. It's a form of abatement. If it is a uniform standard, it imposes the same level of abatement regardless of cost and regardless of project to all people looking to build new ventures in New Jersey. Uniform policies are the easiest, but it does not consider confounding variables, such as the project itself, complications, and then the costs inhibited and taken on by each individual builder. Another potential could be an equal marginal standard that helps to minimize the abatement cost by ensuring that the abatement marginal costs are equal. As you can see with this graph, this displays both of the abatement cost potentials. Marked by 1 is where the quantity is equal. As you can see, firm B would have a higher marginal cost, and firm A lower due to the slopes. If a uniform policy is imposed and 100 units of abatement are looked to be done, each would mitigate 50. Firm B would have a higher marginal cost and therefore increased burden, compared to firm A that would have a lower marginal cost and less burden. This could be mitigated by having them at an equal marginal cost, where each pays the same amount regardless of abatement, so long as total abatement is met. And in that case, you can see that firm A would abate 70 units versus firm B would abate 30 units, but the cost to each firm would be equal. So while considering this policy that the government is looking to implement, it is important to look at the details of how abatement will actually go about, and in order to avoid uniform policy if possible, and try to find a more marginal cost approach to abatement in order to help maximize the economic impacts while also still minimizing the environmental impacts of construction and emissions from housing. So in simpler terms, it's all about information. It is harder to tell where the problem is when you don't have a specific point of reference. Each building contractor must report their own pricing in order to reduce one more unit of pollution. This will allow the governing bodies to see how they create emissions and what they can do to achieve economic efficiency as mentioned before, difference between uniform policy and equal marginal cost policy. This policy applies to all building projects statewide, including ones that are funded by the government. And this will allow standards to be equal across all businesses and sources of emissions if we look at the marginal costs and therefore maximizing economic efficiency under these policies. Now I'm going to talk about two alternatives to the policy that the government has currently implemented, and one of those alternatives is taxes. Now, you could impose new taxes progressively based off of the risk and abatement that new building construction would undergo. So, for instance, you would have higher taxes on higher flood risk areas, and you would also have higher taxes on building projects that emitted more carbon emissions, therefore contributing more to pollution. Hopefully, these higher taxes should have the same effect that the new building regulations would, and they would dissuade people from producing bad buildings, and bad buildings being ones that are at risk to damages from the environment or ones that contribute to damages in the environment through pollution. What is better about taxes is that this doesn't force anyone into a given action and a given decision. It allows individual people to decide whether to build or not to build, but it still has largely the same effect of dissuading people. It would have a similar effect of increasing the cost of building, because instead of now having to follow permits and the additional time in construction and additional time in making sure you meet all the requirements of permitting, you would have taxes themselves increasing the cost of a given building. It would be possible, though, that the government can make this an easy decision through taxes. To make it simple on construction firms, they could make flood maps corresponding to the tax, so a construction firm can easily compare where to put a building compared to other locations by minimizing the tax risk. It would also could make a simplified calculator about building materials and building practices and how that factors into emission levels and therefore taxation on those building practices. By having taxes and basing them off of mitigating risk and mitigating damages, you allow builders to price in risk without forcing anything. So ideally, this should be better for business since business owners still have large control over the decisions they make. It is also potential, since you are having taxes, that the taxpayers from these new buildings could have the money go towards government-based mitigation projects, such as adding seawalls or supporting levees to reduce flooding risk. By doing this, you allow the taxpayers to feel that they have a benefit when they do have to pay the tax, and hopefully are not as adverse to these decisions as they could be, by providing this direct benefit to property owners. Another alternative would be direct investment into the community itself. You could raise money and spend it on a number of different projects to hopefully still inline the state with its mission to reduce emissions, reach 100% clean energy by 2050, and mitigate against rising sea levels and the damages it could pose to the community. Such examples would include research and development of low carbon alternatives, since carbon pollution is the driving force here. You could look into lower emission concrete or carbon capture plants themselves to remove it. And in doing this, you hope that the solution can be found and it can come at a market price, and therefore the market can actually take over, distribute the idea throughout the economy, and reduce the overall impact of building construction. You also could have, instead, with this direct investment, government projects built to mitigate risk from flooding. This could be things such as seawalls or levees, as mentioned before, and these would be important in order to ensure the safety and property of people within the state. However, this doesn't do anything to address the problem of pollution itself, and therefore the situation will only exacerbate and the potential of damages throughout time. but it would be able to hopefully protect people in a long period of time as well. Also, though, as a direct investment, this money has to be raised somehow. So it would either require a broad-based increase in taxes or reducing spending elsewhere on the government budgets. So this potentially could be felt like people as a additional cost without necessarily additional benefit, since most of the benefit for flood mitigation would come only to residents near rivers or near the coast, and people further inland or further higher on ground would be paying a tax and feeling like they receive no benefit. So you'd be subsidizing risky ventures, which also could be a bad thing to encourage. So we determined that the best option may not actually be the option proposed in our article. We thought that the taxes would actually potentially be the best option, even though taxes are usually a big no-go in society. The benefits of taxation is that you can be very direct to those affected. You can target it towards people who are putting buildings at risk and also people who are directly contributing to climate change on a large scale. As we mentioned before, buildings themselves contribute 15.4% to all of the carbon emissions in the economy. So if you can directly affect people making these decisions, you could have a large impact. Taxes still accomplish the incentivization of less risky development. Since you would have high taxes really close to the coast, it would encourage people to build a little further inland, a little bit higher on ground, and further away from any risk. It also would incentivize people to hopefully build with materials and methods that reduce carbon emissions or minimize them as much as they can. So then you are also not contributing to the larger pollution problem of climate change in general. You can also, though, return the taxes in a form of a benefit to those same property owners by building levees, because not all flooding risk can be completely mitigated. You still have to protect people where they have already built or for extreme circumstances. So taxes allow you to do this in order to make sure that property owners don't feel like they're only being attacked, but they can actually feel like they're being benefited as well. This is also going to allow for the greatest use of the market to optimize the decisions here. Since taxes are not it won't determine all the decisions directly by the government. It allows individual construction firms and property owners to decide how they wish to go forward with their future plans. And this is better than direct investment. Oh. Back, not too much. There we go. This is better than direct investment because direct investment would require evenly raising taxes on everyone, in which people may feel disenfranchised in this case. It also has a limited scope, given that the government expenditure cannot affect all aspects of new development. They can only affect what they will actually then be putting money into. It is also potentially easy to roll back, given that government expenditures are inherently of political nature, and with elections occurring every so often, you could potentially have this option removed, and therefore the benefits of it cease. However, taxes have a persistence of staying a little longer. It is also better than regulation because there is the worry of a uniform standard on building, in which the abatement cost is not evenly distributed to all levels of mitigation. So you would have increased costs without any increase in the actual mitigation occurring. It also raises costs with competing states and the same problem of potentially losing business and stifling business. However, this is not then reinforced by having those taxes, by having such things, the taxes come back and then provide a benefit. It is only a cost with the permitting without providing a direct benefit to the property owners themselves. And with that, we'd like to conclude our presentation and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, everybody. We will be happy to answer questions on the middle page, and we look forward to hearing from y'all. Thank you very much.